We are back with another episode of Beyond Sunday, where we keep it real about faith and life, because as you know, life be lifing and people be peopling, because people are people. Anyway, but you know we always do it with myself, Julian Luke, and Pastor Thomas. So today I want to go ahead and jump right into it. I got a question for you, and I've been wanting to ask you this for a long time.
Okay.
Do you think I'm young?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay. What makes me young?
I mean, I think your frame of mind, I think your ability to be able to connect with different generations, especially, you know, a younger generation. I think your outlook and perspective on life definitely tells me that you are young.
So then what would make me old?
I think perspective begins to change as we mature and we get older. For example, you start looking at legacy, more about what you leave behind versus what you still have yet to do.
So you're saying now this is more personal before I get into the actual question. So are you thinking I'm immature? Is that what you're saying?
Not at all.
Okay.
No, I would certainly say you're maturing, right?
Okay.
So being perfected is what scripture would say. Definitely think you're maturing, but in the stages of life, we tend to focus on different things. You're at a stage of life, obviously, where you're focusing on raising kids, focusing on career, focusing on how to move your family forward. When you reach kind of the point where I am in life, you start looking at what you are going to leave behind. What's your mark? What's your impact? How you mentor others.
Okay. I'm gonna really process all this. So you're a boomer, right?
No, I'm not.
Okay. What are you?
I'm 53.
I don't know how to use.
You don't know what that?
No, the reason why I don't know is because when I was younger, I was always told that I was Generation X until like more recently, when like the other younger people, younger than me, started acting a fool in like Walmarts and stuff, and then all of a sudden I got gapped in with the millennial people.
Right.
Because I never heard the term millennial until like more recently.
Right.
So what are you?
I'm a Gen X.
You're a Gen X? Wow, I didn't know that.
Is that right? I'm a Gen X. Yeah, I'm a Gen X.
Wow, I don't know where the line falls. I think
millennials. Looking at our producer, I'm a Gen X. Is that correct?
1965 to 1980.
Yeah, I'm a Gen X.
See, and that's the thing. Okay,
I mean,
but
did I say right? Gen X.
Generation X. Yeah. See, and that's funny to me, because when I was younger, I always thought I was Gen X.
No.
But see, that's the thing, right? Like, I know this is like way off of where I wanted to go with this, but this is really intriguing here, because when I was younger, I just remember I was a Nickelodeon kid. You know, I was born in the 80s. Remember the 80s. Remember the 90s. I never heard the term millennial. It was always Gen X is the next generation of people who are going to be taking over, blah, 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 blah.
No, you would be Generation Y. Yeah, you'll be Gen
I've never heard of that. This is new information for me. Generation Y. This is new.
Yeah, I'm Gen X.
So then
Generation X ain't no joke, though.
we're going to talk about that. So you're X, I'm Y.
Yeah.
Then where does millennial fall into place?
No, millennials is Gen Y. We just have two names.
Yeah. So you are millennial. Gen Y is millennial.
Why do we have two names? Why do we have two names? This is new. This is off brand from where I wanted to go. But why do we have two names?
Probably because some of the births would have been in the new millennium.
Okay. All right. I'm just gonna keep flowing here, because I'm lost with this one. So I kind of asked you this question, and I kind of want you, not because you really talked about it with me, but just in general. Does youth mean inexperienced?
I don't think it has to mean inexperience. It may not necessarily mean that you have as much experience in certain areas of life, but you know, a young person can have a lot of different experiences that an older person has never had before, just because of life circumstances. So
do older people feel as though the youth don't know or can't produce the same way an older person can?
I don't know if that's a feeling necessarily. I think it's probably more of a concern of a lack of maturity than it is really experience, in the sense that not understanding the consequences of certain actions, or not understanding how, in order to get to a particular point, you've got to do these things, or having an outlook or perspective on life that seems to be kind of detached from what most people experience. So I don't think it's necessarily solely a thing about age. I think it can be about more maturity level.
So, and you touched on something. So what if, so like, and I guess I don't want to necessarily make it a me and you thing, but I guess it's the easiest way to do it. But like, what if your experience and my experience, they're just different, right? But we found a way to get to the same result. Does that make your experience, because you're older, better than mine?
I don't think so. I think the question for me really becomes, how have you matured through whatever experience you have, right? Like, I'm 53. You could be 53 years old and be immature.
Very true.
You can have a lot of experience and still be very immature.
Very true.
So I don't think experience automatically means that you're mature. I think experience can help you to mature, but I don't think it automatically means you are.
Okay.
So we can have different experiences and still be at different levels of maturity or similar levels of maturity.
All right. So this, everything from earlier threw my next question off, but I'm going to try to get this right. So I feel, and I totally believe in my heart of hearts, that in the world we live in now, I feel like the baby boomer generation did not necessarily set up my generation for a level of success that we could possibly obtain, because the world shifted. And so because the world shifted, it put my generation in a place of like trying to figure everything out now, because we're caught up in these two different worlds, where the baby boomer generation was about, in my opinion, just kind of get yours, get yours, get yours. But we also grew up in a world where it was like everybody's trying to be loving on one another, and everybody, you know. And so now, even like when we look at college, when we think about the American dream, it's not real anymore, right? So my question is, now, I guess because you're a Gen X, I'm a Gen Y, baby boomers, do you feel like older generation doesn't even trust the younger generation at this point?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a complete lack of trust. I think there probably is concern, right, over whether the younger generation is equipped for the realities that the world presents, right? So you mentioned baby boomers, but probably more for your generation. Yeah, I guess you're right. Maybe did baby boomers, did the previous generations prepare us for the world that we live in? And I think that's probably the concern that, you know, especially my generation and earlier generations have for younger people, is, have we prepared them for the realities of this world? So,
and I guess that just raises a lot of questions, right? Because I feel like the newer generation or the older generation now is like, well, I got mine. Why can't you figure it out? But the world we live in doesn't exist, or the world we live in now didn't exist in the world that they lived in.
yeah, the way the world exists today, you know, changes over time. Right. But there are some things that don't change. And so, you know, the older generation obviously can coach, mentor, help the younger generations in being able to understand, hey, this is the way we did it. Obviously, you don't have to do it that way, but here are some things that don't change from generation to generation. Like, there's some things about Western culture or American life that, regardless of what generation you're in, don't really change a lot.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, I mean, I think our need to go out and make a living, right? Like, our government is not going to provide a financial well-being for you to be able to live off of government wealth base, or you're going to have to be able to go out and find a way to make a job or make a living, or you're going to have to find a way to be able to make a living that's sustainable for you and for your family. Those things never change from generation to generation. How we go about doing those things have changed, but that reality hasn't changed.
Well, that's a good point. Question is that even though the reality hasn't changed, or the way that you go about it, the opportunities may be different.
Sure. I think the opportunities are different. Like, I'll use my generation, for example. Like, during my generation, there was a lot of focus on, hey, you need to get an education, or you need to get a good job. You need to have a solid trade. You need to be able to do something to get out there and take care of yourself. And there were certain milestones that were encouraged for us, right? So a milestone for us may have been, finishing school or finishing, some type of trade school or something like that, and then moving into the workforce. Another milestone for us could have been getting married. Another milestone could have been buying your first home. So there were different milestones that we would have faced and things that we would have dealt with that maybe are not as important, or the order of those things are different for the generations that follow.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with anything that you said, but I think, again, I just feel like, so like when I was growing up, I could walk into a local place and just be like, hey, you got any application? Sit right there, put in the application, get an interview right there. Right. Mm-hmm. That life doesn't exist anymore. What exists now is, and I'll just, if it's just a restaurant, I got to go online. I got to then fill out the form or whatever's online. And then all of that information has to get pushed through multiple things. And it has to be, pushed through a computer, and the computer has to. And so I know people who have put in over 100 applications and not even gotten a call.
Right.
Where I remember a time where you can put in 10 applications and you at least get 6 interviews. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like opportunities are different. The approach may be the same, but the opportunity is different. Mm-hmm. And so in my belief, it's like the older generation looks at like, well, why aren't you doing it right? And you're like, well, we are doing it right. It's just the way that the result comes is different than what you may experience. Do you feel like that's what's happening? Or
yeah, I mean, I think the older generation can be out of touch with the ways in which the younger generation either maneuvers or have to maneuver in the current realities of the world. So Gen Z is the first fully digitally native generation.
Correct.
In our history. So everything for them is digital. So how they navigate, interact, the realities that they experience in the world are different than the way previous generations are. So the idea of, hey, you put on a tie, you put on a shirt, and you walk into this local place and you ask them for an application is not a thing.
Right.
Like, I agree with you. It's not a thing. That's not the way that happens. So, older generations telling younger generations to do that is literally telling them to do something that doesn't work. Like, It's just not, it doesn't work that way. So older generations do need to be in touch with what's really happening, because that's just not the way it works.
Yeah, and that part I agree. I think sometimes I believe, in my personal opinion, I just believe that sometimes they be out of touch.
Oh, we can definitely be out of touch. We can do it 100%.
Okay, so let's take it to the church house now, the church and tabernacle. Can churches get so stuck in their ways that they ignore the voices of the youth?
Yes, definitely can ignore the voices of younger generations. I think, church leadership has a responsibility to make sure that strategically the methods of the church will adapt and evolve as generations continue to grow. I think the church has a responsibility to protect its mission. Like, the mission doesn't change. Doesn't matter what the generation is. The message doesn't change. Doesn't matter what the generation is. However, the methods may change along the way. If we're not willing to change those methods, then we're not going to be operating in a way that connects with the realities of generations to follow. And in my opinion, I think it sets the church up to that particular church up to die, basically.
Yeah, you actually hit to my next question that I was going to ask you. Can not investing in the youth and so on and so forth, can it actually kill a church? Which you actually answered that question. And so, with that being said, do you think that more churches often than not miss that mark of investing in the youth, or specifically nowadays? Mm-hmm. Because I don't know. I remember a time when I was younger, and we, obviously when you came in, you went to your Sunday school, but then I'd sit in the sanctuary with my mama.
Right.
And then we, whether I was actually paying attention or not, she popped me in my ear if I fell asleep or whatever. But I grew up in that room.
Right.
But I've also seen situations, and we talked about church hurt for a little while on the last one, but I've also seen situations where those youth would grow up in that sanctuary and then they're of age where they want to be able to add input and add their voice, but they're pushed down because tradition and age is the thing that's running the church house. So when you see those things happen as a pastor, do you like say to yourself, well, we may need to rethink that, or have you even seen that happen in other churches before?
I mean, I've definitely seen it happen in other churches because, I mean, I grew up in church, so there was a particular point even for myself where I wanted to speak into things that were happening in the church, but because I was younger, that necessarily wasn't always received very well. So, I mean, I'm familiar with what that's like, but also I think just because a voice may be technically younger, it doesn't mean that it's invalid. Like that voice can speak to certain things that I may not be familiar with, or it can speak to a reality that I myself don't experience or don't know anything about. And so I think it's important to always hear those voices and to incorporate those voices. I don't think that young people should just, have a seat in the church. I think they should have a seat at the table too, right? That's important too. So it's not just a seat in the church. They need to have a seat at the table so they can, have their input. And then with guidance and spiritual mentoring and things like that, these are going to be the next leaders to take over, and they're going to have to turn around and do the same thing for the generations that follow.
Yeah, and you've mentioned like receiving that. Do you think that sometimes when younger folks are like giving their thoughts and ideas that they also present them in a way that may be unappealing?
They can be, but I also think that you always respect the messenger, right? You listen to the message. If you need clarity, you ask for additional information. I don't think I've ever experienced someone, especially a young person, delivering a message in such a way that I found it offensive or found it problematic. I do think one of the things that's different when we start talking about younger generations, I think, thirst for transparency and authenticity. And I think that's extremely important. And previous generations in church, just being honest, did a really good job of putting on a face, right? So put on a face.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember growing up in church, like I knew what hypocrisy was, right? Because I knew that some of these people who were standing up and doing certain things in church were doing other things outside of church that didn't align with the things that they were standing or singing about, right? So
to lead the church here, by the way.
Right. So I think that younger generations especially is like, let's be transparent. And the church has to do a better job of just really meeting people in the struggle. Because life is hard. Life is not easy, and people struggle, and that's a reality. And we should be okay with giving people the space to be able to talk about that. I think younger generations want more of that, and that may be off-putting. People really kind of discussing how life is for them and what their realities are, especially when you deal with older generations that were always told what goes on in this house stays in this house.
Yeah. Do you think that churches are doing specifically, and I know we kind of talked about this on last week off camera, but specifically Black churches, do you think churches in general, but Black churches specifically, are doing a great job of involving the youth? Because, obviously, in many churches, you do have your main church and your children's church and so on and so forth. But do you think that churches are doing a good job of involving the youth and kind of transitioning them in the right way to them getting into the sanctuary and seeing what adult worship looks like and so on and so forth? Do you think that they're doing a good job with that?
I think in my experience, there is still some difficulty with that. I think what I tend to see is situations where churches are really bringing young people up, holding firm to traditions and ways of doing things. So we want young people to come along and do what the previous generations did and did what we did, versus we need to let them come along and see what their realities are and see how we can shape our methods in order to better reach them. And then I see some situations where churches just have no interest. Like, you're going to do what we tell you to do until you become an adult. And then when you become adult, you can do whatever you want to do. And not really given much of an opportunity for them to share their voice. So I do think it's potentially a problem, especially when we start talking about predominantly Black church, whether or not we are really working to hear that voice and be able to connect with them. I think a great example of that is that the realities of reaching younger generations require churches, in my opinion, to have a digital platform and to have digital content short form, long form content. That's if you're going to reach that generation. Like that's a reality.
Yeah.
Right. We don't have to agree with it, but that is a reality. That changes what our idea of the sanctuary or the worship center looks like, right? Even in that concept, because it doesn't just become the four walls, it now becomes this digital environment, this platform that opens us up or opens the church up to, many other people. And some churches have no interest in that. They close themselves off from that.
Yeah.
Which potentially keeps them from reaching younger generations.
And you said something that was really interesting. You said that some churches would kind of suppress the young folks until they got older, right?
Right.
But see, I think that's kind of where originally my question came from at the beginning of, do you see me as a young man, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in churches like that, when do they ever see them as an adult?
Mm-hmm.
If the older folks continuously see them as the young person, when do they see them as an adult to allow them to be able to step into that space and lead?
Well, I mean, I think in my perspective, I see them as young. I see them as adults. I see them as younger than me. I see them as capable, competent individuals. Do I have the opportunity to maybe speak into certain areas of their life based on my experience and my maturity? 100%. I believe that opportunity exists, but I don't think that they are less competent in their ability to be able to lead, or their ability to be able to bring value to what the ministry is doing. So I would refrain from the idea of, oh, that's just a kid or a child and I don't need to listen to what they're saying. No, I want to hear what they're saying. Ministry leaders can really, I think, move forward if they do one thing in particular that I think I've learned how to do over my years in ministry, which is to stay curious. Like really stay curious, and I think a lack of curiosity of just about different things in the world around us cuts us off from understanding what's happening in the changing landscape, because the landscape is always changing, right? COVID really accelerated a lot of things that we see happening in the church today. Mm-hmm. And some churches are just not kind of catching up to the impact of all that. And I think sometimes we need to understand that and know that. And so I think that's kind of important for us to think about as we move forward. So,
well, all right. So older people generally have money, long money. Okay. Do you believe that some churches and some leaders in churches tend to gravitate to the older people because they're the ones who got the money that can continue to pour in and invest into the church house versus the younger folks who still trying to figure it out?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that any, ministry leaders faced oftentimes is, making sure that there's a balance to how they're, the voices that they're listening to and the weight that they give to those voices. Even when we have in a church, membership, older members or whatever, more established members in their careers or lives, whatever, who have the opportunity to be more generous. I think one of the biggest benefits that we as ministry leaders can do is help to cast a vision of helping them to see the need for the investment into future generations, right? Not just an investment into a church that continues to do the things I want or give me what I want, but more, how do we look at investing for the future? Like we're investing in ministry for the future. And I think if we have that, then there's a greater cohesiveness in terms of intergenerational groups working together to understand that this is an investment, right? Either time, effort, resources, money into what the church will look like, not only now, but going forward. But if it's more of a focus of, well, what's in it for me? I want to invest in the things that are only for my generation, then it is naturally going to cut off a younger generation.
Yeah.
And it's going to give more weight to the person who has the ability with the louder voice, whether it be because of their resources or whatever.
Yeah, I've seen that happen. And it's actually really kind of, not going to say hard, but sad to see.
Yeah.
Because you see a lot of potential that happens in that church. You see a lot of ideas and things like that that the young folks are giving and things that they're saying that they want to do to be able to move forward. And I've seen it where the older generation and the people with the long money is just like, yeah, nah, we not gonna do that. And you can just start seeing those younger folks start leaving and
Right.
not just really wanting to be able to be invested in that church anymore. And you talking about people who that's their home church.
Sure.
And so I've seen it, and it's really hard to watch and sad to see. So
Yeah, there's some things that ministry leaders have to take into consideration, I think. And I think there's some things that ministry leaders have to do. You know, casting vision is part of it. And then in the process of casting vision, making sure that is a vision that incorporates all of the different generations in the church, right? That there's a participation of some kind for all those generations so that we're all moving in the same direction towards a unified point or goal. The other thing ministry leaders have to do is also be reminded that the church is technically an organism, like it's not an organization in the sense of traditionally, like we would see for a business or something. It's a living, breathing thing. And organisms change. And so ministry leaders have a responsibility to help shepherd the change. So when we start talking about younger generations and stuff, ministry leaders have to shepherd a cultural shift and a change within the church so that we don't move at a pace where we're hurting the mission of the church, but we're bringing everybody along kind of at the same time.
that was a word, and that was a really good word and a great point and a great place to go ahead and put the pause on it, on the stop on it. Any other thoughts? I mean, it was a great way to end it, but if you have any other thoughts, you are more than welcome to give them.
Yeah, no, I just think the other thought is that when we start looking at the connection between what younger generations have to offer the church, it really starts with leadership. Like much of what happens in any church really starts with the leadership and the leadership's comfortability with giving space for younger generations to have a voice, and then giving them space and opportunity to be able to lead, giving them space and opportunity to giving them a chance to grow, like giving them a chance to grow in their spiritual walk, giving them a chance to grow as ministry leaders is so incredibly important. And then being able to walk alongside of them, but also staying curious and also being willing to learn. Like we need to be willing to learn too. Just because I'm from a different generation doesn't mean that I don't have the opportunity to learn. So it's also leading, but also learning. Like it's both of those things.
Yeah, and one of the best things that I ever learned from one of my teachers was the moment you stop learning is the moment you need to step away from whatever it is you're doing.
Right.
And so I carry that with me all the time. And so great point, great thoughts. This has been great. This has been another episode of Beyond Sunday, man. You guys remember to like, share, share this information out. Give it out to all your people. Give it to your peoples and all that kind of stuff. Go back and watch some of the old episodes too, because those were dope too. So you got to go ahead and invest in that. But other than that, man, we appreciate you guys for watching. Remember, this is not just Sunday talk. This is the everyday walk. We'll see you all next time.